We're on it now. We're in the pocket of thought, and this is the thought that I want to expand upon. How to get into the pocket of thought. Not necessarily like steps by which to find yourself in the pocket, in the flow. Some people call it flow. But just talking about this phenomenon is, I think, itself revealing about how to get into it. So if you consider humans as the biological organisms that we are, we're biological organisms. And what do all animals seek to do? They seek to expend as little energy as possible for as much return as possible. Okay? And this is known by business people the world over. They want to cut costs to the absolute minimum, bare minimum, for maximum return. And it makes sense. It's like, if there's a process that you do to get X results and you expend Y energy to get those results, then if you can reduce the amount of energy necessary to expend to get the same results, of course, you're just going to do that. So with the mind, the same thing happens. Consider for a moment that we have a certain mental energy reserve that we wake up with full every morning. That mental energy reserve has to be apportioned to various different modules of the mind. So this is another important point here, is consider your mind as modular. There's different modules. Another way I've put this before is there's different characters in your mind, different people. What are you, a schizo? No, I'm not. I'm just a human, a normal human. I think I'm fairly neurotypical in this sense. I have modules of my mind. Some of them are deeper or lower. Their evolution occurred at an earlier period of time in the evolution of our species, and their presence has been conserved up to this point in our evolution, which is a testament to how effective they've been, at least in the past, at least in our species' EEA, evolutionary environment of adaptedness, which is, just for simplicity, the African savannah, because that's where our species spent most of its time. And now we're in a world that is, as Bret Weinstein has put it so eloquently, hyper-novel. Okay, hyper-novel. What's hyper-novelty? It is simply put, the rate of change in the environments that we find ourselves in far exceeds the rate at which we can genetically adapt to those environments. So why is that the case? That's because humans offloaded an awful lot of their evolution to the cultural layer as opposed to the genetic layer. That's why we are, you hear people say it all the time, it's like, we're so weak. A lion could just come up to us and just swipe us and we're dead, or a bear, boom, swipe us and we're dead. So strength wise, we're pretty weak relative to the other animals in the animal kingdom. We can't fly naturally, as in our bodies don't facilitate flight. Birds can fly, they can freaking fly. But what have we humans done? We've offloaded the evolution of certain traits to the cultural layer, so we can fly in airplanes, and we're pretty freaking strong when it comes to fighting lions and bears because we wield tools. If you have a sword and there's a lion coming up, or a spear, better yet, a spear, and there's a lion coming up to you, or better yet, a rifle, and there's a lion approaching you, you just go like this, and he's dead. He has no clue what happened to him because he's never encountered this before, because relatively speaking, the evolution of the gun happened in the blink of an eye relative to the evolution of, say, the lion's jaws and the lion's claws, or the bear's claws and jaws. So, hyper-novelty, the rate at which our environment is changing far exceeds the rate at which we can genetically adapt. But hyper-novelty, I think, is even deeper than that. I think it is to say the rate at which our environment is changing so rapidly that it even exceeds the rate at which our species can culturally adapt to it. This is another reason why people are so fucked up. And then there's that saying, it's like, it's no measure of health to be adapted to a profoundly sick society. It's kind of like a sickness. And so it's no wonder people are spinning out, tripping out at the strangeness of the world, because it's actually too much to ask individual humans to adapt themselves to the society we live in, because of how different it is relative to our EEA. So anyway, what's the point about thinking and dropping into the pocket is this. I think the mind is, in the same way that biological organisms will seek to reduce energy invested for energy returns. So the energy invested, what's that? Energy return on energy invested, EROEI. In the same way biological organisms do that in the physiological space, I think we humans do that in the psychological space. So when it comes to grappling with certain difficult intellectual problems, or applying your mind to areas of study, chemistry, maths, evolutionary biology, a holistic synthesis of the human predicament, your mind will seek to invest as little energy as possible for as much return as possible. And it's different obviously for the mind, for the psychology of it, because it's not necessarily energy in the same sense that your body's use of calories from food is drawing on an energy reserve there. But I think there's an analogy to be made here, and it's more than mere analogy. I really think this is how it works. So your mind will try and discourage you from engaging deeply in intellectual problems, and it will just, those lower modules of the mind, those more conserved ones that evolved at earlier periods of our species' evolutionary history, will pipe up and try and override your conscious, active, directed application of the energy, some of the energy in the mental energy reserve. But, and here's the point that I want to finish up with, I think you can drop into what some people refer to as the flow state, and in that state, believe it or not, the mental energy reserve, although you're drawing on the mental energy reserve and apportioning a lot of that energy to your directed function, mind module, I think even if in that flow state the lower parts of the mind pipe up and try to exercise influence on your behavior, I think then when you're in the flow state, the directed, conscious, active mind module can override the lower ones, which is trippy. So that's what I call dropping into the pocket. And I think it's in that state that you gain the most, you get the most return on energy invested then in that state. Which is strange, because then you'd think, well, shouldn't your evolved mind then facilitate that? It's like, no, because this portion of the mind is so new relative to the lower, older ones, that the lower, older ones are fairly confident in trying to inhibit it. But if you can, and I'm not exactly sure how to, but I'm, as I said at the start of this video, I think just speaking about this phenomenon is itself revealing. Understanding that you can get into that state, that you can drop into the pocket, might be sufficient to continue to push that active conscious directedness of energy to whatever it is you're pushing it to, irrespective of what those lower mind modules are saying when they pipe up and try and stop you. Okay, so I said I'm going to finish it up with that, but let me continue, because that point about hyper-novelty and the evolutionary environment of adaptedness is important. It is actually to say that those lower mind modules are probably wrong, despite their conservation through evolutionary time, and that being indicative of their being right most of the time. In the hyper-novel environments we find ourselves in, they tend to be wrong, because these aren't the environments, the modern environments, like a city, are not the environments in which these mind modules evolved. So we do well to exercise this more active conscious module of the mind and be a bit more exercise discretion. Is that the phrase? Be discretionary. You have to be able to override those lower mind modules, despite their powerful effect on you, your mind, and your body, and say, listen, you're wrong here, buddy, to those characters in the mind. And I can tell you, I know you're wrong because of my intellectual understanding of the world, so please just pipe down. Oh yeah, and this is important in today's world because there are many problems which won't be solved by resorting to the default, lower, deeper, more highly conserved modules of the mind, or characters in the mind, which is how we humans, by default, because this is how we're evolved, tend to seek to solve the problems in our environment. Because in the EEA, they got it right, usually. So this is a strange period of history to be in, because you almost have to become a bit alien. You have to say to yourself, wait, those very deep, very human modules of the mind are not getting this right. So you have to detach yourself and be like, oh, how do I make sure that they sort of calibrate themselves to this new environment to the extent that they can? And how can I, in my own conscious active mind, develop a sufficient understanding so as to be able to distinguish between those moments in time where they're useful to take into account, like when I'm starving and hungry and need to increase my physiological energy levels via the intake of calories. They're probably right then. But in other areas, they tend to be off the mark. So we have to be able to differentiate between those moments when they've got it right and I should probably eat some food or go to sleep or continue breathing automatically, and they've got it wrong. What would be an example of where they got it wrong? Would be where your evolved apparatus is being gamed by the likes of very sweet food-like substances that your mind and body would insist you must consume that, but you in the active mind are like, probably not. That's going to be satisfying as I take it in and taste it, but it's not going to do what you think it is, Mr. more deeply evolved mind module and character. When I actually take it in, it's not going to satisfy my hunger to the extent that you would have me believe, because you're being gamed, mother trucker, you're being gamed. So if we're to figure out how to navigate the various different bottlenecks of the 21st century, I can't help but think we're going to have to become a bit alien, a bit strange to our more deeply evolved mind modules and characters. And the irony is, it's actually for them. It's for the sake of their continued existence and persistence through time. Because if we allow those default mode characters to take the reins, then they're just going to drive us into oblivion, because they're being gamed, they're being fooled. We're not in the environment to which they're adapted anymore, but we are in the environment to which our active conscious minds can adapt themselves, or at least that's what I like to tell myself. Because here's the pessimist in me. It may be the case that the rate of change is so fast and so vast, that not even our active conscious intelligence capacity can facilitate our species' adaptation to this environment, or change it sufficiently so as to come back into alignment with our capacity to evolve to it culturally and perhaps genetically. So that's the thought. That was trippy, but I felt like I got into the flow there, dropped into the pocket. Yeah, and now my mind is just going blank. It's like, no, you've done enough. Now, James, just stop. And I want to tell it, no, I don't want to stop. Well, maybe I'll just stop.